Hey Addicts, welcome back. We're here for another manga review. This time, yes, we're continuing our Alita coverage with Volume 5. Now this volume does go by really quick. There's a lot of events that happen. Not so much all big story beats, so we'll try to keep that side of the thing shorter so we can get into more of the thoughts. But just starting off, in this volume, we do get a re-insurgence of an older character, Zapan. I'm just going to call him Zap for the rest of the video, though. And then we see kind of where he's been at, I guess. We see that he's very, I guess, broken down, kind of in an obsessive state about Alita. Throw a little bit of self-loathing in there, too. And he's just really kind of unhinged a little bit. Every time he sees or hears of Alita, he kind of loses it a little bit. There's a character that's introduced to named Sarah, which I don't believe we've seen her before. I mean, you guys can comment down there if I'm just forgetting that she was in the first arc, but as far as I know, she's a new character. She does have ties to another character that we know of, but we get Zap killing her accidentally, even though he does have, like, I guess, a love interest with her. And so that kind of sets him on his path to go after Alita once more. So on the flip side of that, we get to see Alita and, Ido and Chimera, and this is set 2 years after the events of the motorball. So there is some things that have changed. Ido and Chimera are now a couple, which... shame on you, Japan. She's like 12. But they also have a kid. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name. It's like, well, I'll just try for the sake of it so you know that I know. It's Kamoi? Kamoi? I don't know. You can let me know how to actually say it. But then we also get Alita being a DJ, which never would have guessed that that would be her profession, but she's pretty damn good at it, I will say. But yeah, so, curious to see what Alita's resume will look like after this series. But anyway, so they're all gathered at Kansas, living their life. Everything's going good. It goes into some more details, like with Alita living on her own and studying language, so everything's relatively good. And then things start to kick off a little bit more when Alita gets a letter from Umba telling them some information that they didn't know before, with Ed selling her berserker body as a way to kind of keep Alita in Motorball, which not sure how that was supposed to work, but needless to say, it fell into some very wrong hands, with Umba saying that he found the dealer to be Desty Nova. Obviously, Ido recognizes the name, so Ido decides that he's going to go and talk to Desty by himself because he thinks he has a better chance since they're both Zalamites and both scientists. So on the flip side of that, there's two things that are happening, and Alita's side is happening a little bit before Ido's, and, needless to say, there's going to be some, timeline differences. Just know that in the volume, it's done all right. Like, there's no mix-ups or anything. It's just me, and like how I'm going to tell it is probably going to sound a little mixed up. But before they actually split their ways to deal with separate things, Ido does give a gift to Alita. This is kind of an important moment because this is like the 3-year anniversary since Ido found Alita at this, the junkyard in the scrapyard. So there's kind of like a symbolic thing there that does go back into the later part of this volume as well. But on the flip side of that, people are starting to notice that Zap is back, and that he's wanting to seek out Alita for, well, what else to kill her. So Alita decides that she's going to take out that piece of garbage. So this is when we get introduced to the other character that has connection to Sarah, which is the Dogmaster Murdoch, being the father of Sarah. So between him and Alita, they go to find Zap. And there's a cool little thing where Alita kind of, once they find Zap, kind of gives him an opportunity to do whatever as she plays a song. And that is really cool. I like that moment because it does harken back to the last fight in this volume, or I guess it's set up for that. But everything gets dispatched pretty quickly. Zap is basically no more, and there is going to be payment later, but just know that that's the end of their first initial conflict. Then we get bounced back to Ido meeting Desty. And Desty, you can already tell on the first panel that he's introduced. He just looks like a sick guy, you know, with that curved lip and whatnot. He looks like he wants to just dissect somebody for the fun of it. But, you know, you get a little bit more insight to his ideologies, his philosophies, going on a very unhinged, you know, I guess, ideal of manifesting karma in the flesh and having it go up against the person that's, you know, karma. Yeah, it's just really weird. You know, I can maybe put a panel in there where he's kind of describing it, but, you know, crazy talk, nonetheless. He also has a few people that are working with him. One that's, I think, the most important to talk about, because she actually does something, is Ellie, which is his assistant, and she's probably just as sadistic as she is beautiful, so hey, they go hand in hand together. But, you know, Ido and him have a talk. You know, there's a lot of information that's kind of poured into this mode, a lot of things that kind of go back and forth, but the baseline of information is that Desty found the remains of Zap's brain. He decides to revive him through his expertise in nanotechnology, wants to manifest the, I guess, opposite side of the karma that, you know, was done towards Zap, so he puts him in the berserker body as like a Frankenstein monster. Ido, knowing a little bit more of the body than probably Desty does, knows it's all going to be bad news, tries to stop him. Desty, he's like, hey, I want to see this work out. It kind of takes Ido captive and is like, you're going to be my experiment now. So there is some things that lead to Zap breaking out and Ido breaking free temporarily to try to stop him, leading to, yes, Ido's death. But, you know, in this world, death is, I guess, kind of, you know, a relative term, especially since, you know, we just got introduced to the guy that can literally bring back basically anyone. So, you know, needless to say, you'll know that's not a definite, but we get to see that Desty does send somebody for Alita to kind of lure her there. And as you can imagine, when Alita finds out the information about Ido, she kind of goes berserk herself, tries to kill everyone, including Desty, but because of the nanites that Desty has, they're able to heal. And basically, Desty gives, I guess, Alita an ultimatum where it's like, hey, if you face your karma and you win, then I will revive Ido. And so Alita, knowing that Zap's on the rampage, goes back to Kansas because she knows that, you know, that Zap knows that that's where all of them were at. So she decides to head back there. You know, there is a lot of rampage and destruction and killing that Zap does, not only at Kansas, but in the rest of the scrapyard. So a lot of people are dead. A few of the more prominent characters, or I should say the only other prominent character being Shamira, she is able to survive. So we see her escape and meet back up with Alita temporarily for just a bit. But the forces at the factory are sent out to stop Zap. They are not able to. So after seeing the townspeople kind of rise up against Alita and want her to kind of sacrifice herself, Alita does decide that she's going to, you know, face Zap, because, I mean, that's what she was going to do anyway. But there is a moment, though, where she, it does give insight to her ideology again, you know, showing that she doesn't really understand people's, I guess, lack of will to survive, or lack of, I guess, drive to overcome their circumstances. So she decides to be the stronger person and go up and face Zap after, you know, contemplating what all the other important people that she has had run-ins with would do. So she, you know, gathers herself. She gets a weapon from Desty that is the only way to defeat the berserker body. It's like a poison that, I guess, disintegrates the body, or at least the mind that's attached to it, so that it can, you know, stop its rampage. and she puts this in a gun that Desty gave her, which they do a little setup here saying that, and I think they've done this before in the earlier volumes as well, and maybe the first two, that weapons, especially guns, well, not just weapons, but specifically guns, are illegal in the scrapyard. So if you're caught with one, it's an automatic, termination. You'll just be killed on sight. I don't know I don't think Alita is known to this information. It just tells you through some other means. But we get the big fight with Alita versus Zap, and it's a very dragged out fight. But Alita is able to overcome him, but is left in a very devastated state in multiple pieces. So she definitely wins, but she is in the point now where she could basically die. And that's how this volume ends. It's kind of on a cliffhanger. But that's essentially it. So we're going to get into my thoughts. So this volume is, like I said, very fast-paced. It's very action-packed. For that reason, I think a lot of people will like this volume. It might be even most people's favorite to this point, just because it does have a lot of that big scope action. For me, I do like this volume a lot. There is something about it that does feel a little off. I don't know if that's just in my state of mind right now or if it's specifically from this volume, but it was a volume that I read the fastest so far. It kept my attention all the way, and I just kept wanting to flip the page to see what was happening next. So I guess a couple things I should break down. So with Zap returning, it's cool because in the rest of the volumes we haven't really had a villain or an antagonist be introduced, have a little conflict, and then disappear and then come back. So I love that approach more so than like throwaway villains or like the villain of the week. So for that, I did like the return of him. His motivations and his kind of drive to go against Alita is a bit lackluster for me. It doesn't really quite do it or pull it off. I don't know if that's necessarily because I'm forgetting some big things that she did to him, but at least from what I remember, she didn't really do anything specifically to him, right? I mean, the big conflict that they had was going after Yugo's bounty, and she basically just outsmarted him in that. It's not like she had a full-on brawl. Not that I recall, but I might be forgetting. Let me know if I'm just misremembering that. But needless to say, I think with, having the ties with Sarah and having that as his main motivation, it just doesn't do it for me. Although I do appreciate a lot the interaction that her and him have in kind of like his final moments in his mind, or maybe on what they're supposed to be saying as another plane of existence. But I do like that part though. Now with Desty being set up, I do like this a lot because this is a little bit of a glimpse that we will see a very darker tone, or maybe the most dark tone that we've seen so far, because he does seem very evil and sadistic. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they'll do with him. I think they bring an interesting dynamic in several, or just, things that they can play with in several areas, because not only is Desty, he kind of is set up, I mean, I don't want to say this as a definite, but he is kind of like an evil version of Ido, right? They're both Zalamites, they're both scientists. It's just that Desty has definitely a much more twisted look on life and how scientists should be than Ido does. So that is cool because obviously Alita has that relationship with Ido, and going up against somebody that is really has a lot of parallels to Ido, I think that's cool. Also with Desty being set up as a genius scientist that can basically bring back anybody from the dead with the technology that he's made, that leads it open to having more of a super genius versus maybe a power type hero. I think those are sometimes more interesting if they're done right. I mean, you can have a power level against a power level done right as well, but I think in this case it would be cool to see somebody that does kind of outsmart Alita, or just because I think that's maybe Alita's weakest suit is not to say her strategy, because she does have really good battle and combat strategy, but I think her terms of, you know, just other kind of thinking and problem solving maybe a little too basic when it comes to facing Desty. But the other thing that they set up really good is that Desty not only is smart, but he also has the technology that could make him a very formidable foe in a fight. I mean, even if he's not as skilled as Alita, his technology, the way it works, could be a big problem with her, or a big problem for her. So I do like that. There is a little moment that Desty does seem a little foolish in this, so I don't know if they'll play on that as his weakness that Alita will exploit or not, but hopefully that's not going to be a negative when we see him again. The only thing that I hope is that he will be the biggest villain in the series, and he'll be an overarching villain. We'll have to see in the next volume, because if we see him in the next volume, I'll have maybe some doubts, but you know, if we wait until like the volume after that, then I think that route could be very plausible. But I'm hoping that they don't waste him too much, unless they already have another villain that's going to be bigger than him in mind for the whole series. But at this point, with Volume 5, and we have, I think we're at the halfway point now, or maybe a little under, or a little bit over. So, you know, definitely need that big villain to show up soon if it's not him. Now, the one last thing I will say is the downtime in this is nice. I do like that they give a little breather. You know, they give a little bit of time for them to be at peace and have good things going around for them before all of this chaotic and, you know, depressing stuff happens. But the one thing is that it's really weird, because it's in this middle ground where it's it feels off a little bit of how fast it goes through that, but at the same time, if you look at the story and all the characters and where they're at right now, it really makes sense that this is like the best approach to have it, because you know, with the characters in the series so far, the only ones that really have any development or really interesting you know, things about them that would benefit from a more dragged on, you know, peaceful time is Alita and Ido. None of the other characters really have that development that would, you know, really benefit to seeing an extended downtime. Now, granted, if they were to develop some other characters, if they had extended that, then maybe. But seeing as the approach that most of them were all killed except for, you know, the main ones, you know, that is something that, you know, ultimately it's fine the way it is. But I do hope that if Shamira is going to be a bigger role later, because she did survive, I do hope that they do give some time to develop her, because out of the big three of like the protagonists, I would say she is the weakest, just because like very one-dimensional, you know, almost like that comedic relief type character. The only other thing I will say in closing is Ido's death. It does hit hard, because Ido is one of the best characters in the series. It's not really hard though, because like I said, there's only two characters that really, you know, have development. But I am really excited to see where they're going to take this. There's a lot of avenues they could go. I feel like it won't be more of the Yugo approach. I feel like there'll be something a bit more twisted, just given how Desty is, and, you know, using maybe Ido against Alita later on. But that's just my take right now. This volume is a solid gotta have it. It's very good. Again, there is some minor downsides again, but overall really solid. And I think if you are more of the just action type, you like a lot of action in your story, this volume will probably speak to you a little bit more. I don't think it's necessarily my favorite volume, but you know, again, for those people that like the action, you're not going to be disappointed. So anyway, guys, that will conclude this review. I said it was going to be shorter, but not really. It's still like 19 minutes. But you can go check out some of our other stuff if you haven't caught up on the volumes up to this point. Go back, because we do have the other ones out. But with that being said, hope you guys have a great day. And as always, peace, addicts.